1 Kings. And tonight your homework was to read 1 Kings chapter 3, just one chapter. It's the only night that we'll have just one chapter. I'll remind you that next two Wednesday nights I will not be here. We have Jim Shepard, who's going to be teaching a class on King Saul, and then Don Knowles will be teaching a class on King David. Since we're not covering either Saul or David as a character in this study, we have David still alive at this moment, but or David has been in the first two chapters in the first part of our class. He's not the focus of the study of 1 Kings. Tonight's session is called A Wise Choice and a Bold Ruling. A wise choice and a bold ruling. Now, if I hadn't been on vacation, I would have done two things differently. I would have had a little bit more written in for discussion questions, and tonight I am going, I forgot my Bible. Not my other Bible. I got this Bible, but there's another Bible. I had some questions written in, and I may get that in just a few minutes if I need it, but it would have been a little bit longer of a lesson if I had been here through the week, and also you would have had those pages three-hole punched. But I'm not sure how many of you are making use of the three-hole punch and putting it in a folder, but if you are doing that, there's a three-hole punch in the office. You can do that, help yourself to do that, or I'll assist you if you'd like help with that. But anyway, sorry that these pages tonight are not three-hole punched like the ones that you got previously. Yes, Ruth? Okay, so let me make the announcement I made last week. If there's no more left on the table, there's a master file. You can check the table, but there's a master file that should be kept around the copier. Aubrey was supposed to make a folder, so you can go there, and those are masters. Don't take those, but make use of the copier with that. That way everybody can catch up if they'd like. I still intend to, and I have the ability to do this, but I'm just waiting until I get some more of it done, to post this on the Facebook as a document to download. So you could print these or have them, on your computer. All right, so chapter 3, what do we find in chapter 3? Here's just a quick rundown, and we'll read some of it as we go back and discuss it. Solomon makes an alliance with Pharaoh, and he marries the Pharaoh's daughter, okay? I know that this is the elementary stuff, but I also remember as a kid how I grew up thinking about things, and I want to make sure that we understand Pharaoh is not some person's name. Pharaoh is a title. Herod is a title. Pharaoh is a title. There were several Pharaohs. There were several Herods. There were several, Caesars. Those are titles, okay? So keep that in mind. He marries Pharaoh's daughter, and he finishes building the palace, he finishes building the temple, and he finished building the wall at Jerusalem. Both the people and Solomon are still sacrificing at the high places. Did you get that, or do you remember reading that? We're going to talk about the high places in just a minute. While offering 1,000 burnt offerings at Gibeon, which was the most important of all the high places, which is obviously where Solomon would go if he's going to sacrifice, the Lord appeared to him in a dream, and this is his first appearance of two appearances that the Lord will have with Solomon. And he says in the dream, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Okay? Solomon recognized the kindness shown to his father David, and David was faithful to God and was righteous and upright in heart. And we also recall that David was called a man after God's own heart. Solomon sees himself as only a little child. That was interesting when you read that, not knowing how to carry out his duties. And you might recall that it's mentioned a couple of times that the number of Israel people were so great no one could count them. So he feels overwhelmed, doesn't he? Because it is a large group of people he is in charge of as king. He asked the Lord for a discerning heart to govern and to distinguish between right and wrong. Now, remember something that I mentioned last week. That was when David was given his final charge to Solomon before David dies. David gave him the charge to, first of all, obey all that God commanded and also to act like a man. And then he gave him a couple of things about Joab was one of them and about Shimei as another. But in both of those requests, David said, deal with this according to your wisdom. And in other words, I entrust that into your hands. He felt confident in Solomon's ability and competency to handle his charge as a king, right? But then he also says, but don't let the gray head go down into the grave peacefully, okay? And so he fulfills those duties. This is before he gets wisdom that David recognized my son has wisdom. He had some wisdom. And I think it takes wisdom to ask for what Solomon is going to ask for. I think this is a very wise choice, don't you? The wise choice would to get wisdom. You got to have a little wisdom to have made a choice like that. It's kind of, it's a prerequisite for it, okay? So God's plea, Solomon had not asked for long life or wealth or even the death of his enemies. I find that kind of interesting because David's final charge basically had something to do with make sure that Joab and Shimei get theirs. But Solomon hadn't asked anything on behalf of his enemies. Now, if you read the Psalms, David often is praising God for what God has done with his enemies. Have you ever noticed that when you're reading Psalms? And when, of course, David's being pursued as much as he was pursued, you'd probably be praying God do something with your enemies too. And I think it's okay to pray for your enemies. I know there's a scripture there that says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And so I think that you need to understand that praying for your enemies, here's how it's put in the Bible. Do good to those who persecute you. Bless those who persecute you. That's what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. And there's that little section in Romans that says, when you do good to those people who you would identify as your enemy, it's like heaping hot coals over their head. And I'm thinking sometimes our goodness is with the intent of inflicting pain, and it shouldn't be done that way. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because Jesus taught, love your enemies, didn't he? That's a tough one. And God is impressed that Solomon did not ask for any kind of vengeance or revenge on his enemies. Does Solomon have any enemies at this point? Yeah, now they have kind of scoured into a reclusive mode because you have the attempt to overtake the throne or to have subdued the throne before Solomon could come into charge. But they've all kind of tucked their tail and kind of humbled themselves after David put Solomon in his spot. But he doesn't have the enemies like David had, obviously. But he will. Okay, so he doesn't ask for long life, wealth, or death. God grants him this: discernment in administering justice and a discerning heart that will be unmatched by anyone who's ever lived. In addition to what Solomon had asked for, God also gave him wealth and honor to the degree that no other king ever had. He says, I'm pleased you didn't ask for this, and since you didn't ask for this, not only am I giving you what you did ask for, I'm going to give you this as an added blessing or bonus as well. He promises Solomon a long life, as long as he did what his father David had done in keeping the decrees. This was, as pointed out, God's first appearance to Solomon. He returns to Jerusalem, and he sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the ark of the Lord's covenant in Jerusalem. Then he gave a feast for all his court. That's kind of the first section of chapter 3. The second section is a display of how he could administer justice. Two prostitutes come to Solomon with a problem. Both of them had babies, 3 days apart. In the middle of the night, one of the babies had died because the mother had obviously rolled over and lied on it, and it smothered to death. Sad, very sad. Out of her grief and sorrow, in the middle of the night, she swaps babies. She takes the live one and puts the dead one with that first mother. They both come before God. One says this is what happened, and the other says no, she's lying, the baby's mine. What did Solomon have them do? He instructed somebody to bring a knife or sword. Was it a knife or sword? I think it was a sword. And gave the order that the baby be cut in two, like it's treated like property. Cut in two. Give one half to this mother, give the other half to this mother. Okay? And the one mother, the real mother, stood up. Would the real mother stand up, please? Because of the love she has for her son, said what? Let her have the baby. She was thinking only of what's in the best interest to her son. And if that's what it means, if that's what it takes for my son to survive, let her have the son. What'd the other mother say? No, let's not go that way. Cut the baby in two. Give the half to her, give the half to... Now, let me ask you something. Where was Solomon? I'm actually getting ahead of myself because this would be discussion, but I want to make sure I ask it because I don't think I listed this as a question. Where did the wisdom of Solomon actually get displayed in that story? What part of that, or let me ask it this way. After hearing all the detail I've run over so far that we just talked about, could you make the decision who the real mother was? I could. I mean, seriously, if somebody's willing to give up the baby and the other mother is saying, no, kill it and divide it, I don't have to have much wisdom to know. I think I know who the mother is, don't you? The wisdom is not displayed there. It's displayed in the decision to go get the knife to cut, or the sword. Why do I keep wanting to call it a knife? The sword. That was where the wisdom's displayed. Because by the time that is, in my way of wording this, he's sniffing, he's, I'm not sure how my English is going tonight, please forgive me, but he has baited a hook, and that's where the wisdom was. Baiting the hook. That's going to reveal. Well, so what's the question he asks? I'm not sure what question he asked, but it's calling for the sword, and the order is cut the baby in two. There's the bait. And it drew out the real mother to say, let her have the baby. And it showed the evil intent of the other mother. And it does not take a rocket scientist, I don't think. It does not take a well-seasoned expert in the law to realize that's the real one and that's the fake one. Because the fake one is harboring resentment already, knowing that she's lost her baby. Now, it's sad all the way around, isn't it? But the wisdom is from what he did to draw them out like that. That's where the wisdom was. That's maybe my opinion, but I think any of us could have figured that out on the backside of that. But that's an opinion. Obviously, God had granted him discernment in administering justice. And Solomon says, give the baby to the first woman. She is his real mother. Do not kill the baby. I often wondered, why isn't there more to the story here with the other mother? You know what I mean? The intent to do evil and harm to a baby. And how is she feeling after Solomon says, give the baby to the real mother? After this, it says all of Israel was in awe of Solomon's wisdom and his ability to administer justice is what's being bragged about. I love the fact that although Solomon is known for having many riches, and Solomon is known for having have this palace. The temple that's being built is elaborate. It's Solomon's temple was the most glorious, one of the architectural pieces of art that you could have possibly ever imagined during that time. That he's first known for his ability to administer this justice. That was ahead of everything else. Okay, so there's the summary. What was your favorite part about chapter 3? Ruth? Were you raising your hand or just? Okay, well, you bought a cow at the auction just now. When you do like that. Okay, all right.
That he asked Solomon what he wanted. He asked for anything.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Very good. Do you have something?
Well, I was thinking, okay, it said these two women were harlots. Well, when the mother of the baby got her baby back, I wonder if she changed her lifestyle.
I bet they didn't live together anymore. This speculation. I bet they didn't live under the same roof anymore. You wouldn't want that person around your baby, I think. It's a good thing to ponder. Anybody else have a favorite part of this or what you thought was interesting? Yes, Terrell.
Well, it says the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So he saw the Lord, he saw what the Lord looks like. Seen the Lord look like.
Well, we don't have a description given, of what the Lord looked like and what manner he appears to the Lord in. The Lord appeared to Moses in the form of a burning bush. And, I'm thinking of the passage. Some people would say, yeah, but nobody can see the Lord and still live. There was that one place where on top of Mount Horeb, if you remember this, God wouldn't allow anybody to see his face because that's the part you couldn't see. But I'll walk by. I'll put you in the cleft of the rock here. I'll walk by. When you're standing in the gap, after I walk by, you can look at my backside. And that's what Moses did. He comes out with his face glowing like he'd probably been around some kind of nuclear energy plant, and he would have to start putting the veil over his face because eventually that started fading away and people were putting more trust in, his face is glowing, he's got God on his side and all this. And of course they'd lose a little bit of that when his face started fading. So that's the cause for Paul's writing in 2 Corinthians 4 or somewhere there in that 4, 5, 6, or 7, those chapters of 2 Corinthians, where we are unlike Moses with unveiled faces see his glory. So interesting.
When it said that Solomon loved the Lord in verse 3,
Mm-hmm.
but he still sacrificed in high places.
Yes.
Wasn't that?
Yes. Let's talk about high places. You've heard the song, right? I've got friends in low places. The high places were actually, spiritually speaking, the low places. Here's the reason why. Physically, they were high places scattered around. Mainly, what you find were on top of the high places were idols to. You may have had some Molech worship also, but I'm not really remembering Molech being associated with the high places as much. Molech worship was the sacrifice of infants through the fire. That was how you sacrificed to them. And I'm not so sure that I remember a reference to the high places in either 1st or 2nd Samuel. I'm having to think that it's probably there, since it's mentioned here without explanation. The high places though through 1st and 2nd Kings are going to be like the Achilles heel. Here's what I mean by that. There are, these high places represent idolatry. They represent what happens, as God pointed out, as a consequence for failure of driving out all the inhabitants. Because without the driving out of all the inhabitants of Israel when they conquered the land, people that remains, their form of religion, their rituals were going to remain and affect God's people like yeast. I mean, it's going to grow and increase, and people that intermarried, or people that were neighbors to people that should not have been there to begin with, began to feel that adverse impact of not completely purging Israel. And so other religions were being, other people were influencing Israel with the other religions. That's what I'm trying to say, with idolatry, Baal worship, Asherah worship. These high places were those points at which all these other people were going to, and God's people kind of joined in with that. We already know this. God's people have already had the inclination we want to be like others around us, because that's the reason they asked for a king. One of the reasons, so they'll fight our battles and we'll be like everybody else. When you want to fit into society, society is going to affect you. Maybe infect would be a better word. It's something that is going to be a footnote to some of these kings. For example, and I'm not going to have any specific name for you, knowing that there's 40 kings and just getting any of them's names right is already a challenge, and remembering which 8 of the 40 are good kings, that's also I can name a few that are good kings. But even some of the good kings it's mentioned, they did what was right in the eyes of God, and yet still some of the high places remained, when God actually wanted the high places dismantled, destroyed, to not let them exist. Now, I really think that my first recognition of when the high places start entering into the picture is with Jeroboam, which is not yet. We're a few chapters away from Jeroboam. Well, we're not far from it. Probably about chapter 7 to 8 or somewhere in there. No, probably chapter 11 or 12. Chapter 12 was when the kingdom divides. So it can be about chapter 12. That's the first recollection I have of a high place. When I read this in 1 Kings 3, I thought, is it too soon for the high places? But it makes me want to go back and look at 1 and 2 Samuel, see if they had been enacted. You got one? All right, so they did exist before then. You know, this is news to me. When I was reading this earlier, I thought I needed to do a little bit more background on that, but I wasn't ready for that. But I am asking that question tonight. Why wasn't... It's interesting that Solomon is up here at Gibeon doing what all the other people are doing, and God comes and says, ask for whatever you want, and God doesn't reprimand him. That's interesting. That's one of these questions I have down to ponder. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Okay. I don't know. But, and this is totally sidetracked here from what you just asked, but just now dawned on me too, that the first failure of driving out inhabitants happened with the Gibeonites, because they ended up making a treaty with them. Again, here are consequences to that. But that's a good question, Jerry. I don't know if I don't know the answer to that. All I know is it's pointed out as the most prominent of all the high places, which is, if Solomon's going to go to a high place at all, he'd probably go to the most prominent one. Good question. But why wouldn't God say something about that? What are you doing up here, Solomon? Instead, ask whatever you want. Now we know up to this point there's not been a temple, but he's just completed it, and the wall, and his palace. So now he has a temple. I think that's an interesting thing. But just when we'll see this, because I suspect we're going to plot right on through to 2 Kings 2 eventually. You're going to see this in 1 and 2 Kings, that reference. It's like a refrain to a song, and yet the high places remain. It'll be like, they did this, isn't this all recorded in the annals of the king? This is all written down for you, and here's what good they did, what good he did, and all that. But the high places still remain. That's going to be, as a matter of fact, that might be a challenge. Count how many times that phrase is going to appear throughout the text of 1 and 2 Kings. Yet the high places remained. It's like they went that far, but they still didn't quite go all the way. They didn't have complete annihilation of idolatry. The first question to ponder that I had written down is, why does it say Solomon brought the daughter of Pharaoh to the city of David until he finished the temple? When I have here this section on our worksheets that says questions to ponder, I'm going to give you a hint. They're questions to ponder because I don't always have the answer to these questions. I really don't know. But I thought that was interesting. That's why I wanted to ponder it. Did you find that interesting? It sounds like, first of all, why does he feel led to make the alliance with Pharaoh? But then I think, well, that was common. And it's a strategic move to do so among kingdoms, especially when you know you might have opposition. It helps to have allies. We all know that. And we know that within monarchies, this is how treaties were made. A son would marry a daughter, or vice versa, right? So that part is not really bewildering to me as much. The part that's bewildering is, why did he bring her to the city of David until the temple was finished? And it doesn't say anything else from there on. Did he send her back home? Did she live with him after that? Why is that mentioned until the temple was finished? Any thoughts? Knowing it's only speculative anyway. We're kind of beyond the slaves quite a bit. I mean, and when you say slaves that built it, okay, let me back up. Slaves that built the temple. I guess I need to see where slaves built the temple. I'm not sure I'm convinced slaves built the temple. I mean, I'm saying that knowing, if I was a betting man, it's probably slaves that built the temple, but because I know who built the Taj Mahal, I know who built all the stuff in Egypt. They were slaves. So I'm not sure on that question, but I'm not positive there. Yes, Sam.
Clearly, she was not a Jewish descent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's all on that temple built before the law is still in for the same reason that God wanted high places.
Okay.
Because he didn't want that, he wanted the place of worship of his God there and predominant. Signal, maybe we're not gonna let you bring through.
But it's not said that he didn't bring her in until the temple was finished. He brought her in to the city of David until the temple was finished. Yeah. Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know nothing about the way I had read it was he brought her there until the temple was finished, and then what did he do with her until the temple was finished? Yeah. It's interesting. Huh? Okay. Well, it's something to ponder, and nothing that's going to affect our eternal salvation here now, but I mean, it's something to ponder, right? What was my, okay, I've already asked the second one. Let's look at the third one to ponder. Why would the second mother suggest the second baby be killed? Okay? Oh, man. Does that reveal the nature of a person? I think that's pretty revealing. This is why I said a while ago, I don't think you would have had much wisdom at all to determine, after the facts come out, who the real mother was and who the mother wasn't. Right.
Well, I think that's it. I think that when you ask for the sword, you got that elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Standing around, let's go get the sword. And we're like, oh, what's fixing to happen now?
Yeah, and there's some. Y'all know me good enough that I like to get my imagination involved in stories, and sometimes it runs maybe too wild. But this Solomon's in the infancy of his reign, right? And we've got Nathan, Abiathar, Zadok the priest. I don't know if they're in the room, but here's what I picture, Jerry. Zadok is just standing over here, and Nathan is just here, ready at the summoning of the king for any counsel he might. What's the word of God on this or whatever? And here comes the two prostitutes. I can almost see it this way. Zadok saying, Nathan, watch this. We'll see how he handles it. I think he'll do this, and you think he'll do that. We'll see. This is a good test for our boy here. Because he saw himself as a little young boy. Let's see how the boy does this one. Two prostitutes come in. Sounds like the beginning of a joke. I don't know. Bring the sword. I'm looking at Nathan. Nathan's looking at me if I'm Zadok. We're all looking at Abiathar. Are you going to say anything? This is like, this is done in front of people. Who in their right mind would ever even suggest a thing to kill a baby? I'm saying that really realizing that it happens every day. But you have this decision, it's like, wow. And just for Solomon to say that. And you think the sword shows up?
It's almost like Pharaoh and killing the babies, trying to get Moses.
Yeah. But this, it's very revealing. It draws out the truth quick. I'm not even sure the sword showed up at the throne room. I think it's that quick. But this was the talk of the kingdom. That's the main part of this story. This was the poster child of the display of the wisdom that God had given Solomon. And if I'm Nathan, if I am Zadok or one of the other cabinet members in Solomon's throne room area, this was like, you remember that time when Solomon started off with this? And it was like, wow, because this was the talk of town. This was the talk of town. Okay? Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, so I got an answer to that, and of course that certainly would be an option. But the answer to that is then justice would not have taken place. Justice would not have, it would not be just to withhold the real mother from her child. I mean, and this was to display his ability to administer justice. So it's the textbook example of here's how much of that kind of wisdom he had. But yeah, like in the case of Pharaoh's daughter raising Moses, and that was a great preservation story. The providence of God is actually working there, but it's again Moses' mother that's willing to give up, knowing that her son could be spared. The Pharaoh's order to kill all Hebrew babies. That's right. Now, I will be honest right here. I wished I had the time to have had like 6 other questions to ponder. Does anybody else have a question that makes you want to ponder before we move on to this next little part? Okay. The next part, the discussion, again, should have been longer, more questions here. Why do you think it was important that Solomon make an alliance? I have a typo there. Make an alliance with Egypt. Kind of mentioned that already. It was a thing that was done frequently. It's not out of the ordinary to have done that. How important was it that Solomon make the sacrifices before the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem? So let me remind you of what's going on. He has gone to Gibeon. 1,000 sacrifices there at Gibeon, where all the other sacrificing. And he's in a dream. God appears, asks for anything you want. I want a discerning heart to administer justice. People are overwhelming in number. Help me out here. God says, I'm pleased you didn't ask for wealth or honor or long life or death of your enemies. Therefore, I'm going to give you what you asked for to administer justice and discernment to guide and govern your people. And I'm also going to give you this wealth and honor and long life if you follow what David's done. Prayer's over. He goes before the Ark of the Covenant to make sacrifices there. Burnt offering and fellowship offerings. Thank you. And then throws a feast for the people after. Why was that important? Well, it's the first time it's been done. It's the first time it's been done in front of a physical temple, in the temple, before the ark. This is a stamp of approval. It's an affirmation vicariously through Solomon that God is saying, this is the place I'm to be worshiped. This is where it happens. Not on Gibeon, not another high place somewhere, here. I don't know if we understand this. I'm not saying I understand it, but I'm asking you to consider some of the dynamics that are involved when you travel somewhere with your livestock to make sacrifices like this. Does it hurt the market for Solomon to no longer go to Gibeon? Have you ever thought about that? Does it hurt the market? Well, what do you mean market? Do we realize that part of the problem Jesus had with the money changers that were in the temple was the fact that people who had traveled a long way either had animals that were too famished, or they were being judged at the gate, your animal's not good enough, you need to buy one of mine, forced to buy the things that were there, that would affect the market? Because what Jesus was really upset about was the money changing that was going on there. The abuse or taking advantage of people traveled a long ways. I think there's an impact there when you take that away from Gibeon or any other high place. How many of you have traveled to places where there's famous sights to see? Like we went to Canyon de Chelly on our trip to Gallup on one of the days we had a day for excursion. How many of you have been to Canyon de Chelly? Beautiful canyon. You get more in touch with it than you can the Grand Canyon. You know, the Grand Canyon, it's awesome. There's nothing like it, you know. But you're standing on the rim and it's still like it's too far removed from you almost. Canyon de Chelly is a little bit more up close and personal, but still very, very cool. And like the Grand Canyon, who's been to the Grand Canyon? You know that there's a drive that goes along that south rim and there's pull-offs. You take this little road and there's a name. One of them's like a little tower lighthouse thing that sits on a little point. Go to that place, and there's parking areas, and there's bathrooms, and of course, what else is there? Gift shops, or if it's not a national park gift shop, then maybe somebody's there on the hood of their car selling jewelry, and that's happened at Canyon de Chelly. It is a marketplace because it's a tourist trap. It's inviting. And people like that. People like that. If you remove that impacts. You remember the temple of Artemis or the temple of Diana in Ephesus? They were selling little shrines, and this kind of caused some trouble when Paul had come in there and planted the church because this was going to ruin that shrine maker's business. Remember that? You know, that's there's a lot of impact going on there. This is a huge move for Solomon to bring the sacrificing here to Jerusalem. So I think that's interesting. Go ahead, Jim.
Go back to Deuteronomy 12, where they're talking about going into the new land. That's where God's commanding them to destroy all the high places
Okay.
and the Asherah poles. And he also says, and when I set my place for you to come worship, that's where you'll start doing your sacrifices, and that's where you will join in feasts and fellowship. This is the first instance of that.
That's a fulfillment of that. Okay.
Yeah, that's what's commanded.
That is awesome. What do you think of Solomon's decision to cut the baby in two? We've kind of talked about that, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Things to consider. Now, things to consider as always, here's the bottom line, and these are purely things that I have come up with from my response to this story, but I also want to invite you to bring into it anything you've got. I think it's always best to stay humble before the Lord. Here's Solomon. He could say, oh, I don't need anything, God. I'm doing pretty good. I think I got this handled. He doesn't say that, does he? He says, I only see myself as a little child, a young boy. Excuse me while I cough some. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he'll lift you up, right? James 4:10. And just the fact that he recognizes and is not afraid to ask for what he is lacking in. And I'm not sure he's lacking. Excuse me. Ruth, can you give me some water? I get emotional when I talk about these things. Man, I don't know what came down my throat there, but anyway, so just the fact that he is saying, I need you. I need this from you. And of course, what's he need? And what is he asking for? And this is another one of my points here is wisdom is worth more than wealth. And James says something to us about that, doesn't he? In the book of James, what's it say? If any of you lacks wisdom, what's it say? All right, let's look at it. James 1, verse 5, I believe. James 1. I hope I'm in the right chapter and verse. James 1, verse 5. Somebody read that.
If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you.
Is this pretty straightforward? This doesn't to me sound like one of those verses that there's gray areas here. I'm not sure anybody can tell what's being said. This is pretty straightforward. If any, who's that include? You, me, her, him, them, us? And by the way, who here lacks wisdom? You know? So that's pretty straightforward. If any one of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. Thank you. What is this? That's pretty cool. Y'all see that? Thumbs up. Now it says coffee, but brother, that's the weakest coffee I've ever seen in my life. That's so clear. As a matter of fact, I'm suspect. Okay, it's water. Thank you. I love that. We actually had that in the church building? Okay. This is probably somebody's cup. I wonder if it's being washed. Probably Paul Regier is the one that brought this and forgot it, so hopefully I don't catch what he had. Somebody posted a meme yesterday on Facebook that says, you know it's going to be a good day when your coffee is smiling back at you, and it showed the little bubbles around the rim. There was a mouth and two eyes. It was really cool. Thank you. All right, where was I? Wisdom. Straightforward. If any of you lacks it, ask God, who does what? He gives how? Has God ever given but not given generously? Think about that. Think about that. Has God ever given but not do so generously? Okay, and God, I'm thinking of Luke 6:38 says, when you give, it'll be given back to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, overflowing. That's how it's given back. That's like, it's more blessed to give than to receive because of what the reciprocating action of God's going to be in your life. Malachi asked, test me. You tithe and just see if I won't bless you where your barns are going to overflow, And I know we know this. He gives generously to all without finding fault. And what I also like about this is the fact that, and I think it's in Hebrews, we are told we can boldly approach the throne of grace. Now, I don't think boldly means they're like going in demanding something from God, but going with confidence. And that's what James is also reiterating here when he says, but when you ask, this is verse 6, you must believe and not what? Don't doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Wow. When you ask for rain, you better get the umbrella. You know what I mean? Don't go home thinking it's not going to rain, or go home after having asked for something, but trying to come up with plans B, C, and D, thinking God can't do it. Now, sometimes God's answers are not what we want when we want it. We do have to remember, sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, sometimes the answer is not yet. A lot of times it's a not yet. But God will supply all that you need. I love that about what we have before us, a promise that's given to us, not just this thing that God is doing with Solomon. Do you not realize he's asking us the same thing? And we ought to answer in the same way. We're just children. Life is overwhelming. We need a discerning heart. That brings me to another one of my bottom points. Effective leaders must have a discerning heart. They need to make decisions sometimes that are very difficult. Terrell has stepped into this position he's willing to be one of the elders here, a shepherd. And all these shepherds, they have an awesome amount of responsibility to keep their eyes open, to keep watch, to guard and care and feed the flock. It can be an overwhelming task, which is why I believe Terrell and Jimmy and David, if he's in the room, where did he go? He's drifting around, I think. This is why I think there is a plurality of elders. It's too much for one person. It really is. It's too much for one person. And it needs to be a group team effort. A discerning heart. And a discerning heart, I think, means you may not always know the answer yourself, but you can be resourceful enough and be willing to ask. And that's what I told Terrell this other day, I appreciate about his willingness to serve is he's still willing to ask people for their thoughts, get feedback, and asking, it's not, Terrell does not sit here tonight thinking, I have arrived and I know it all, just come ask me. You're not thinking that at all, are you? But you are interested in knowing what the flock needs. Jimmy, David, Gail, they're all the same. They're willing to say, let's listen to the needs of the flock. People will vote with their feet. And I think this is one of the definitions of shepherding. I'm kind of going off here a little bit, but one of the definitions of shepherding is a shepherd is determined by the fellowship it has. Otherwise, there's not a shepherd there if you're not having anybody follow. You can call yourself a shepherd all you want, but if no sheep are following, you're not shepherding. Sheep will follow the people they trust. Jesus is teaching this principle in John 10 where it says, my sheep know my voice. They trust me. They trust me. Kind of got off on a tangent there. I always ask God for wisdom ahead of every important decision. And again, I have referenced James 1, 5 through 8. And God will provide us with what we need whenever we're willing to put Him first. God will provide us with what we need whenever we are willing to put Him first. And I think that's what is playing out in chapter 3. I had a passage here in Proverbs 4, but it's a passage that not too many Sunday nights ago, we were at Pawhuska Church, and they did a study over Proverbs 4. Some of you kept that little handout with the notes on it. It's pretty good notes. But it basically says, get wisdom and get understanding along with it too. And I just wanted to kind of close tonight with the idea of what wisdom really is. Wisdom is not the accumulation of information, of facts and numbers and historical events. That's knowledge. Wisdom is the application of the knowledge you have in an appropriate way. Of what do you do with that information? And you know this is true. There are people that have a great amount of knowledge, but not much lick of common sense, if you know what I mean. Book smart may be a term that you hear sometimes. And there are some people that do not have a degree, have not gone to college, may not have even completed high school or even grade school, as far as that matters, that's got a great amount of wisdom like you can't believe. My papa was one of them, and I know I'm a little prejudiced. We always are with our family, right? But he knew more things about things than people could even wonder there would be such things, even think about to begin with, you know, because of his experiences. And that's where wisdom gets displayed, is in your experience. You can know what to do, but until you do it, you can't really say you're an expert in it. You have to have done it. That's why I think on-the-job training is the best way to learn something. We got a handyman over here, a professional carpenter, craftsman. What was the best way you learned? Which book did you get all that out of? No book, was it? You saw somebody, and somebody handed you a hammer and said, now you do what I do. That's how it worked, didn't it? Somebody mentored you. Probably some people, not just one. We need that spiritually in discipling, don't we? We need that to say, here's what you just need to go do. Read this verse. Go do that. Well, why don't you show me? I could tell somebody how to make a hospital visit, but the best way to make a hospital visit is, or learn to make one, is once you go with me to make a hospital visit, and you'll learn. You'll see. I'll stop there since we're about 2 minutes over. I hope y'all have a great next 2 weeks without me. I hope y'all, I really do hope that y'all be blessed, not suffer because I'm going, but be blessed because you'll get to hear other people teach, and looking forward to seeing your lesson stream next Wednesday night. In 2 weeks, Don, you'll be nationwide on the internet as well. I shouldn't have told him that yet. He'll back out. I'd like to get the boat in the water first without it taking on water. It's interesting trying to repair a leak on the boat. And you know how we were repairing it? We're filling the boat up with water so we can see where it's leaking. That doesn't make sense, does it? But that's what we were doing yesterday. We have discovered some leaks, and we fixed most of them. So I think if you want to try it out with me in the tomorrow afternoon sometime, just show up at Bear Creek, and we'll go launch, and we'll go 100 yards, see how we're doing. Bring a bucket.